Good afternoon, and welcome to D&I One-on-One, a monthly webinar series where we talk about different topics related to culture, inclusivity, diversity, belongingness. I've had a great run. This has been a 4-year series. This is officially my last session of this series. I have a new series starting in 2025, so more on that. Watch for that. But today's conversation, we're talking about race, talking about anxieties and challenges and opportunities when we step into some of that uncomfortable stuff. So today, we want to invite you all to reflect on and share with us in the Q&A how can we unpack our assumptions about the way whiteness shapes our understanding of race, particularly through the lens of allyship. I'm Jina Etienne. I am a CPA, but after 26 years practicing in public accounting, I'm now a consultant, trainer, and speaker. My work is centered on something I call fearless inclusion, which I define as the freedom to be yourself and the ability to create space for others to do the same. And boy, oh boy, are we going to be talking about creating that space today. I develop trainings and workshops focusing on the core skills to drive organizational change around culture, conscious communication, intentionality, and etc. My passion is helping professionals build deep connections, cultivate safety, and thrive as inclusive, mindful, and trusted colleagues and leaders. Joining me today is Alicia Katz Pollock, owner of Royalwise Solutions. She's best known for her QuickBooks online training program at Royalwise, and she gets a lot of people saying that her voice is really familiar. So many of you might have already seen her, or you might hear her voice and know who she is from her QuickBooks Accountants podcast. She's hosted QuickBooks Talks, and she's one of Intuit's trainers. Her hobby is painting Dungeons and Dragons minifigures, heroes, and monsters, which for the record, I don't even know what that means. And I have no artistic ability. And she tells me she lives on an IV drip of coffee in Portland, Oregon. So Alicia, thank you so much for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here. Thank you for having me. Yeah, we had all of this stemmed from a conversation that Jina and I had at Appy Camp back in September. It's a retreat for intentional educators in the accounting space, and I don't even know where to begin. But we had a conversation that kind of lit both of us up, and we're like, maybe we should have this in public.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to start with honoring the fact that you're willing to be so vulnerable and brave talking about whiteness. It's because, first of all, putting that word white woman in the title, I was anxious about it, I'll be honest, but I wanted to honor you being willing to do that because, when we first started talking about this webinar series, it's what is it? What are you passionate about? What is it that you think we can talk more about? And this came up. Can I ask you, then I'll toss it to you first. Why is this so important?
Well, I consider myself anti-racist, not just like saying, oh, I'm not racist. Like, I want to end racism. And the only way to do that is by education and communication. And it's a hard conversation to have because the whole time that you're having the conversation, there's that little voice in the back of your head going, but am I racist for having this conversation? And so it gets really meta. And having a safe space and a safe opportunity to have these conversations in a way that it is supportive and positive is necessary. And the fact that we can do that with 1,000 people watching is actually kind of remarkable.
Yeah. And well, it's remarkable that you're willing to do it. I do it for a living. And so thank you for that. I think when you talk about safe space, I wanted to touch on that for a moment because safety happens in a number of different ways. Like you and I both agree that we're going to talk about this. And so knowing that we step into this conversation, we can already anticipate some uncomfort, but we're ready for it. And I'm going to trust you that because I'm good at open mouth, insert foot, I can sometimes be the queen of that, that you'll be gracious. And I will hopefully be the same. And I think that's the first part, is having an understanding and agreement with each other as you step into these conversations.
Absolutely. I mean, part of it's just intentionality.
Yeah.
When you're having these conversations, are you intending to just, be uncomfortable to get some answers, or are you intending to be obnoxious? And, I'm definitely not intending to be obnoxious.
Certainly not on purpose,
Right.
but I've been told that I can be blunt. And I know this, and sometimes I try so hard to not be blunt that I end up stumbling on my words or I come across anything but authentic. And so trying super hard ends up having the opposite effect.
Yeah. And, sometimes misspeaking is part of that authenticity, but if we give each other the grace
Yeah.
to, insert foot and know that it doesn't mean anything, then you can just move forward. Oops, keep going.
Or maybe it does mean something, but it isn't intended to be hurtful. And the
Right.
meaning behind that is maybe what we can explore a
Mhm.
little bit more. If I'm willing to say, yeah, oops, I messed up.
Mhm. Exactly.
Well, let's start the conversation with the picture of the ice cream, shall we?
Yes.
Because you and I had a conversation about pizza. I think we have differing opinions about what makes a good pizza. Do you want to explain why cheese pizza, what that means to you?
Yeah. Like for me, cheese pizza is not pizza. Cheese is not a pizza topping. Cheese is on every pizza, so therefore cheese is part of the pizza and it's the toppings on the pizza.
So
Or
until there's a topping, it's not pizza. It's just dough with things on it.
yeah, I mean, it's a pizza, but it's a cheese pizza. Like, unless you have, like, a 4-cheese pizza, now that's a pizza.
And that's tasty.
Right. And so, like, pizza is, like just a cheese pizza is kind of like the default pizza.
Mhm.
Or vanilla ice cream. Like, yeah, vanilla's a flavor, I get it. But, like, vanilla ice cream to me is like ice cream without all the inclusions that make it fun to eat.
Ice cream without anything in it.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And so, I used these to represent the assumptions that we have culturally, that we have these cultural defaults, that the world was kind of built from the white perspective, and then anything else is additional and
We're different.
different, right? And that may be fine when it comes to pizza, but that's not fine when it comes to people.
Yeah. And I think we want to acknowledge the fact that this isn't a wrong thing. What we're talking about is acknowledging the realities of our society. Our society has historically been predominantly white. And as a result, the social, cultural norms that come with that are based on that majority. This is true in any country you go to where there is a majority, the culture tends to follow. What we're talking about, though, today is as the world, and particularly the United States, becomes more diverse, there's more than cheese pizza. There's more than that kind of pizza. There's deep crust pizza, there's thin crust pizza. I know some places they make it square. I don't get that. But that's the first part. And so that's what makes it so uncomfortable, though, Alicia, sometimes, because as soon as I say the word white, I feel like it puts everybody on the defensive. Like somehow I've now come out with my claws or something.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's really being able to take a look at the world around you and see if it's just kind of like a neutrality or if it's an omission.
Mm, that's a really good point. I, when we were talking in planning for this, one of the things I think I said, I hope I said this, was that when I walk into a room, it doesn't even matter if the room is predominantly white or predominantly people of color. I walk into that room almost always conscious of my race. And I feel conspicuous though when I walk in and I'm the only. Now, it could be the only woman, it has nothing to do with race. Um, it could be the only person that is the native English speaker. It could be the only person of color. But I notice that, and I all of a sudden start trying to adapt myself and understand, how am I the pepperoni on the pizza, or how am I the chips and the chocolate chip? Okay, that one is probably not the best example to use in this situation. Oopsie. But I mean, does that make sense what I'm talking about?
Yeah, it does. I mean, Portland is a foodie town, for example, and if I want Korean barbecue, I want to go to the one where I'm the only white person in the room because I want the authentic experience. And so, I'm familiar whether it's because I'm the only person in a Korean barbecue or because I'm the only Jewish woman in the room, I get that experience of looking around and looking for people who are like me or
Mhm.
not like me. And, as human beings, we evolved from, but our survival mechanism was people like me.
Yeah.
That are the things that are like me and the people like me are safe. My family is safe, my tribe is safe, but those animals out there might kill me.
Or
And
the other
so
tribes. Yeah.
or the other tribes, right? And so we actually have this actual limbic system's job is to keep us surviving.
Right. It scans for safety, and when it spots something that is perceived as a danger, that's when we are protective of ourselves. Fight, flight, free. Right. Fight, flight, free, flee, freeze. I can't. I'll get the words. I'll get the words. But one of the things that's interesting for us to know about is that even though we've evolved and we're living in a very modern world, that is still a very primitive part of our brain. And so in the happy hour, right? And you look over and you see somebody that's different than you, there might be a processing in your brain that says, "Ooh, stay away," or that person might be uncomfortable. And we're not even aware we're doing it. This doesn't make us bad people. I think that's what's important to talk about here when we talk about bias, because bias has sometimes made it sound like there's something wrong with us, but we're just human. So it's not a question of if it's happening, it's a question of can we become more aware of it in the moment so we don't let it drive our behaviors and actions.
Right. I mean, it's that us and them,
Mhm.
that it's part of human nature, but it doesn't really serve us. And redefining who the us is and widening out us into um, eh, eh,
Oh,
not weaponizing them and otherness is really crucial.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I want to move to this next slide.
Mhm.
I did say we weren't going to necessarily go sequentially through the slides, but this is feeling like the right kind of conversation flow.
Yeah.
You shared this with me when you were saying things you thought we could talk about. So I went out and I watched
I'm
this
sorry.
video.
I forgot something about on the other slide.
Sure.
Um, I don't know if any of you watched Saturday Night Live last week, but Chris Rock was the host, and one of the sketches that they had was a mall Santa, and they had a black Santa and a white Santa, which in self was actually horrifying and problematic because kids are supposed to believe in Santa, and so now all of a sudden there's two Santas. Does
Yeah.
that mean that there's no Santa?
Right.
So that
Right.
was, like, my biggest problem. But the whole thing was that they were trying to make people uncomfortable with, like, "Well, you're not choosing the Black Santa."
Yeah.
And one of the fathers said, "Well, which Santa do you want?" He's like, "Oh, I want the default
I
Santa."
want the default one. Yeah.
And so the default Santa was the cheese pizza.
Well, but then you also had the woman who she wanted as different a pizza as possible, but it seemed like she was doing it in a performative way
Right.
to prove that she had this, she wasn't biased.
Mhm.
Um, so, that was swinging too far in the other direction. Um,
Exactly.
it
So
was
everybody
very,
should
that
go
was
watch
funny
that
though.
one.
I thought
Yeah,
that
that
was
was funny.
all right. So back to this video. You shared this. I actually went out and watched it on YouTube, and I thought this was really interesting. So for any of you who've ever watched Jimmy Kimmel, and a lot of comedians do this, they go out on the street and they ask people questions, and they're basically setting them up, right? I've seen so many of these, and I know that if this ever happened to me, I'd just walk away. Like I wouldn't participate in this if I were one of the people on the street. But do you want to talk about how this went?
Sure. So I watch Jimmy Kimmel almost every night, and the man on the street segment for that day was, "Do you have a black friend?" And they've done this periodically. It wasn't the only time. Like they do it every few years, and so they stop people and say, "Do you have a black friend?" And some people would say, "Well, no," and some people would say, "Yeah, of course." And then they'd say, "Oh, well, what's their name?" And they'd be like,
Uh,
and some people would be able to list out, but there was one more element to it.
well, they would list most of them could only list a first name. And then we would ask them for their last name. They're like,
No.
yeah. So, but
Yeah,
go ahead. Yeah.
and there was also an element to it where Jimmy would actually ask the audience for their prediction, "Does this person have a black friend?" And the audience would vote yes or no, and then they would ask
They
the
declare.
question. Um,
I
And
thought that was really an interesting part because it showed what all of us are assuming about the person. It just goes to show that this is happening like multi-directional, right? This isn't just pointing to somebody and saying they're doing it.
right, so it's like meta.
Yeah.
How far back can you take it?
Yeah.
But what this got me thinking about was, okay, do I have Black friends? And then, and that was challenging to me because, first of all, I live in Portland, Oregon, which is very, very, very white. And I also never leave my office. I literally work 15 hours a day in my office, and so I don't even get out to even make
You
friends.
don't even see other humans other than
Yeah,
your family. Is that what
exactly.
you're saying?
Exactly. So, like, I don't even have, like, I have a friend group in Portland, but I see them, like, once a month maybe. And then I started thinking, okay, well, I do have Black friends, but those are Black colleagues. Those are my accounting professional friends. But because I don't have much of a friend circle, my accounting friends are who I consider to be my friends.
Mhm.
So therefore, I was able to say, okay, I have a Black friend. I have several Black friends. But then I started thinking, wait, but would they call me a friend? And that brought it to a whole different level.
Yeah.
Would
Yeah.
they call me a colleague or would they call me a friend?
I meant to look up the statistic on this, so I apologize that I didn't because I think I said I would. So I'm going to make up roughly what I remember, and that is that most of us, and I mean most of us as in the vast majority, live in segregated worlds. So most of us do not have a friend that is in a race that is not our own, or maybe one. And that, again, this doesn't make it a bad thing. And there are so many reasons for that. Some of it has to be just the neighborhood where you grew up in. They don't just spontaneously become diverse. People have to sell their homes and move. And we don't all move that much. You said you live in Portland, which is particularly white. I live just north of Washington, D.C. This place is pretty diverse. And yet, if you asked me, do I have a white friend? Okay, I do, but I have maybe a half a dozen out of all my friends. So it's not like my friend base is particularly diverse. So this isn't just about white. But I think, when we talk about questions from a white woman from that perspective, some of this is, like, do you even think about, do you have a white friend? If somebody is white, do they even think about, do they have a friend of color?
Mhm.
It's just not on your radar, so to speak, on a day-to-day basis, even though it's on some other people's radar who aren't part of the majority.
Yeah. Mostly on my radar is, if I don't see them, do I have friends? But that's where social media came in for me.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah.
I think it's interesting what you said about, would somebody who's a person of color say that you are their friend? I don't think, though, that has anything to do with race per se. But I do think sometimes race is one of those things that makes you think, could you even be friends? I'll say this. So for me, I met this one person, actually was a colleague. This person, white. We got along in so many ways, but it felt like we never became friends. Like we never moved from the strictly professional colleagues to friends. And I sometimes wondered why, because I would have loved to have been friends with her. And I wondered, is it because I'm Black? Like I actually had that conscious thought. But I didn't want to lean into that. I thought, I'm not going to attribute that to her, but I will say that I've had that thought in reverse.
Mhm. Yeah.
By the way, I meant to say this at the beginning, that if anyone has questions, thoughts, comments, drop them in the Q&A. We're watching the Q&A as we go along. We're happy to take questions as we go along. And I can tell you, Alicia, the audience that comes and joins these sessions, they're not afraid to share their opinions and their thoughts. For example, somebody said that you could have tomato pie. So I'm just saying,
Right.
the pizza doesn't have to be just cheese and it doesn't have to have toppings. Except I think that's what tomato pie is. I don't know. Do you think, though, having a segment like this was helpful or hurtful? Because in some ways it's making fun of somebody.
I mean, I don't want to like have it at their expense, and that's the people who are being interviewed on Jimmy Kimmel. But that's actually one of the things that we talk about is like, okay, how many people did it take for them to interview before they could actually get these cuts? Like another one that they do
Mhm.
was name a book.
Yeah, the one that I saw
Just
most recently
not
was
even like have you read have you read a book, but like name a book, and people will be like the Bible, and they couldn't even like come up with a piece of literature.
hint,
And
hint, hint. Think of a movie because it's probably based on a book.
right.
There's your cheat.
Yeah.
Um, all right, I'm going to move to this next conversation because whew, this one we could have an entire session on. I actually have a whole program on microaggressions. What I loved about the cartoon that you have here is the microaggression that we hear people cite a lot is that a Black person is called articulate by a white person. And that can be troubling because if you say I'm articulate as if it's a compliment, my question to you is why would you think that's a compliment? Like how is that
That means that your default is that Black people aren't, which is
correct?
right.
And so but people are saying that that's not what I meant. I meant it as a compliment. But what's here is that you're not understanding the message that's coming through. You have good intention, going back to what you said at the beginning, not necessarily understanding the impact of that. But what's worse and what I've had experience, because this has been said to me, is I mean, sometimes I don't say anything, right? Like they say that and I'm like, thanks. And then that's the end. But if I thought I could have a safe conversation with that person, what I find is people get defensive. So it's hard to, I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable by letting you know that that was not as complimentary as you think. Why do you have it going the other way though? Your green hair is so amazing. Because isn't that a compliment?
Well, so they're both compliments, and like, I don't know if you can see it here, and I've got I have green hair. My hair has been rainbow for years. There's the thing, but like coloring your hair is like an objective observation, right?
Yeah.
There's default hair with like not color, brown hair, black hair, blonde hair, whatever. But there's no weight to it. There's no assumption of that I can find behind it. Although there's been in the beginning, a lot of people are like, well, I can't take you seriously as an accountant professional because you color your hair. And, back to I live in Portland, Oregon. Everybody has colored hair. Everybody has rainbow hair. And so it's just, it's part of my default.
Right.
Um,
Right.
in a way. And so the when I made the slide, it was really reflecting on that story that you were telling me, where if you're complimenting somebody on something that has an assumption behind it,
Mhm.
then that's where it becomes a microaggression.
I think the challenge here is that sometimes you're aware of that assumption. And so the compliment is to, in theory, offset it or get ahead of it, or um, you say something to show that you aren't dot, 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 and unintentionally prove the thing that you're trying to avoid.
Yeah.
But the challenge is that sometimes it feels like everything is a microaggression. I've had that question come up too. Like, I don't feel like I can say anything anymore. So I say nothing.
Mhm.
What do you say to that?
You're better off sometimes saying nothing than saying something that could be taken wrong. I mean, it's like, if I'm talking about like complimenting somebody's dye, that's one thing, but I know not to compliment a Black woman on her hair because it's different than white hair. Like, eh.
Actually, yeah, I can see why you say that. I don't know that that's a general statement, but to your point, if you are uncomfortable or that's a rule you've created for yourself, by all means, I'm not here to say that's right or wrong. And you're so articulate, one Black person might laugh at it and another Black person might be fiercely offended.
Mhm.
So that's where this gets to be difficult. There's no right answer, though. That's part of the challenge of this conversation.
Like if somebody has like done up their hair and they're obviously aiming for fancy and complimentary, then sure.
Yes.
But if it's just like their normal day out,
Yeah.
then maybe not.
There's somebody said something, Bruce. So when someone says, that is an interesting thought, is that, it just moved. The whole Q&A just.
Oh, I have it.
Okay.
So the quote is, that's an interesting thought, as the assumption that they don't view of being capable of an interesting thought. Now, I don't think I would read that sentence that way. For me, it's more about myself and, I've never thought about that myself. So if I said, oh, that's an interesting thought. If I say that, I'm thinking, I never thought of that. That introduced something new and exciting to me.
Yeah. I can see where Bruce is coming from, though. And because I have been in situations where somebody said something in a way. So this had to do more with, it's not the phrase, but the context, the tone of voice, the facial expressions. Maybe it's the power dynamics in the room. I've had people say things to me that it felt like a put down. So on paper, the words were okay. But when you stepped out and looked at the entire context of the situation, did they really just say that? And I will say, when that happens to me, I now say, am I being sensitive? Even if they did say it, did they mean that to be hurtful? I'm just going to go ahead and give them the benefit of the doubt and move on, because otherwise I can also be hurt here. And I don't want to live in that space. But it has taken me work to get there. I will say that 15 years ago, I wouldn't be so gracious, I don't think.
Yeah. And, I'm always looking for new ideas and new thoughts and ways of things that I have never thought before. But that's what makes Alicia Alicia. So when I read that question from Bruce, for me, that's just kind of my modus operandi. But that's a complete assumption for somebody else. If they have a different approach to life, then it can definitely be interpreted completely differently.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think the bottom line to all of this, if we were to stop right now and say, thank you for joining us, and then go away, the honoring someone's intent and extending grace is huge here, because it isn't a question of if. We're going to do the open mouth insert foot thing. We're going to say something at some point that somebody will take differently than what we meant. So it's really about, how do you show up in those moments as the person who said it? And how do you show up in those moments when it was said to you? And thinking about both sides of it. Because oftentimes I know we can be, self-righteous when we said it and we didn't mean it. But then when it is said to us, we aren't so kind.
And I think that's the key with this thing about the microaggressions, is if it was said to me, how would I feel? And if I would feel okay, then it's probably okay. And if I would feel a little uncomfortable, then you're probably making the other person uncomfortable.
Yeah. Story time.
Okay.
So we both were going to start the webinar with these pens in our hair. Like I have the little orange one. Okay. And it just coincidentally matches my background in her shirt, everyone, just by coincidence. But there's a story here. And actually, the story was that happened. We were both in the same place. I won't say where, but what's going on? Like, why did you want to put this blue fuzzy-haired pen on the slide?
So I am known for my sense of humor. I am known for my QuickBooks courses to not be eye-gougingly boring. But in order to be funny, sometimes your jokes don't always land.
Yes.
And so I've got two stories to share. And so the first one that brought up the pen and brought up the whole thing is these are vendor swag, right? So all the sponsors always give out these pens. And we were at Appy Camp, and there was somebody presenting up at the front of the room, And I looked at him and I looked at the pen and I'm like, he's got the same hair. And like the pen kind of looks like him. And I thought it was hilarious. And I said, hey, look, it looks just like you. And he did think it was funny, or at least if he didn't think it was funny, he was gracious enough to
Played like it was.
to play it off like it was. Um, another instance, or do you want to reflect on that, or should I go into the other?
Well, no, go ahead.
Okay. And so when I was a kid, I was in the Girl Scouts, and I was a Girl Scout like long after most people drop out. Like I was into high school, and my troop was the most diverse troop in Philadelphia. We had 4 different races and 3 different religions, and a girl with Down syndrome, and a girl in a wheelchair. Like we had like, being just one of everybody, right? And
Benetton ad of
yes, yeah, we were the Benetton Girl Scout troop of Philadelphia.
yeah.
And so we were out on a camping trip, and we were playing flashlight tag at night. And the Black girls in the group were my posse, were my crew, and we'd been in this troop together for years. They went to my bat mitzvah, so they're friends, and we're getting our teams together for flashlight tag. And I say, well, we've got an advantage because you're harder to see in the dark. And I thought it was hilarious. And Patty was so mad at me for that. And it was just an observation of skin color, and that you can shine a flashlight on me and you'll be like, oh, there's Alicia.
Yeah. That story really resonated with me because I'm biracial. My mother's Filipino. My father is darker skinned. And my brothers and I are about the same tone of brown, slightly darker, my older brother, but not by much. And I lived on a very diverse street as well. So lots of people from different countries, religions, and so on. And I was in a church that was very diverse. And I remember, and so when I was really young, I looked at skin color because we never talked about race. I lived in utopia, apparently, and we never talked about race. And so for me, people came in different colors. I didn't label people based on race. I thought of people around skin color. And there was a little girl, she was Black, very fair skinned, appeared white to me. And I made a comment about her skin color, and she was offended. And I didn't understand for years. Like once I finally got it, I've been retroactively mortified like since then, that she understood that I was referring to her in a way that interpreted it from a racial perspective as white. And she was not white. And she grew up very aware of her race versus me, oblivious to mine until, a couple of years after that. That wasn't about humor, but it was about the point that you're making, which is making assumptions and then saying something, thinking it's innocent, or in this case, funny.
Mm-hmm. And, I would like to think that we can joke about race, and stand-up comedians can joke about their own race, but not other people's. And so, I would like to be living in a world where this really was funny.
Yeah. Or this one.
Right.
Yeah. What is the name of Dry Bar? Do you ever watch those comedy series? It's called Dry Bar. It's in Utah. And so it's almost all white audience. And you can watch these on YouTube. My husband and I will watch them from time to time. And I've seen people go up there who are gay, Black, overweight, like you name all the stereotypes. And these comedians will come up there. But in particular, we were talking about race today. So in particular, there were 2 comedians that started making jokes about race. And I was so uncomfortable watching it because I was worried those jokes weren't going to land. Mm. And on one of the occasions, one of the comedians, it was humorous, but it wasn't funny. And another one, everybody was cracking up and it felt safe. But yeah, sometimes you think it's funny and it's not really funny.
I mean, I guess overall you're better off not making the joke, but then again, if we can't make jokes about observable things, again, I guess it comes down to intention.
Yeah.
But, I would like humor to be a bridge.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
would say, though, I just had a thought about self-deprecating humor.
Mm,
Sometimes that backfires too. I know I've tried to do that as a way to neutralize a situation, not always in a way that it landed properly either. So, I mean, humor is a very powerful tool when used right,
mhm,
but it can be almost more hurtful when it's not.
right.
It can
Yeah.
sting more.
Well, because it all, it's the surface of what's being said versus, again, that intention behind it. And if you don't have the context and you don't have that shared context, I think that's the key, is the shared context.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's something somebody put in here that I want to read. Okay, I'm putting my glasses on. Let me not pretend. Okay,
Mhm.
y'all, I can't read. Okay. Many of my relatives or friends who are in their 90s say things like, I never saw a Black person when I was a child. That makes me uncomfortable, but I must realize that they are my elders and they don't know any better. And I would say, instead of don't know any better, I know what that person, I think what they meant. They are speaking their truth. They are speaking from their own experience. That doesn't make them bad, or that doesn't make it wrong. I went to a predominantly white school as a 98% white. And my roommate was from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and had never seen a Black person in person. And sometimes I look back and I think, can you imagine going to what you think is an all white school and you walk into your dorm room and you have a Black roommate? Like, what are the odds of that, right? And so it was very uncomfortable for her. It didn't even dawn on me for 2 weeks what might have been going on with her. And so eventually I confronted it, not in a bad way. I used humor. What I said to her, we'll say her name is Jane. What I said to her, Jane, is that I think she's made me a little uncomfortable. And I don't know if it's you, but I've never lived with a white person. And if you've never lived with a Black person, perhaps we can use this time together to get to know each other better. And I won't make assumptions about you if you don't make assumptions about me. And it landed properly when I said, I don't know about you, but I've never lived with a white person. And we became good friends. And it was very much what this person said, is that it's not that she was bad, or it's not that she was wrong. This was her lived experience. And I have to start with honoring when somebody says this is their experience, believe them, trust them, and then meet them there to get to where you want to go.
Yeah. And it also is about the change in cultural assumptions. Like,
Mhm.
going back to the conversation about the pizza and assumptions, things were really different 100 years ago, 50 years ago, 20 years ago, 5 years ago.
Yep.
And so things that are absolutely not okay now were assumptions back then. And I actually kind of myself have a little bit of trouble with cancel culture, because
Mhm.
if somebody did something wildly inappropriate, but they did it 20 years ago when nobody even thought twice about it, I'm willing to forgive them if they're not doing it now, and if they haven't done it since.
Or
I'm not
understand.
willing to cancel somebody for something they did when they were, in their early 20s, if everything that they've done so since then shows a different person.
I couldn't agree with you more, because Lord knows I've done some things that could get me canceled. Maybe not for the same reasons, but there's another question here I want to address.
Uh-huh.
And it is, why do mixed race people like yourself say that you're Black? If you are white and Black, why Black? What a good question. And I will say I spend a lot of time thinking about this, because let me phrase it differently. My mother's Filipino, my father's African American. And I am both of those things. But if you look at me, I present as a Black person. If you think about my identity, the way I navigate, the people who I think that I look like, the social life that I lead is stereotypically Black. So I refer to myself as Black. I also know that if I told somebody I was Filipino, they would be like, huh? Like, I would get that look, and then I'd have to explain. And
Mhm.
I specifically don't say African American. and I don't say Filipino. And there are some people who are very clearly don't say African American because they're not from Africa; they're Caribbean, and so they are very clear what they use. But at the end of the day, that somebody says black is just it's a choice, right?
Yeah. And that's also the terminology has changed, and that's also kind of challenging sometimes because, when before I was born, they called black people Negroes.
Yep.
And then when in the 60s, when I was born, the term was black. And then when I hit college, you couldn't say black. You had to say African American. And then now it's back to black again.
It's back to everything now.
Right. And uh, and I was talking about that with somebody, and she pointed out, well, you can't call me African American because my family's never been to Africa. And the person who was sitting next to her said, and my family's not American. And so,
yeah. And I
therefore,
used to think what I thought was interesting about African American in general is somebody who's white that comes from Africa is African American. But African American is a different is a different term for black in this country, instead of recognizing that Africans are not all black. So I just thought that was interesting. All right, I'm looking at time.
Okay.
This is an important topic to have. I'm so glad you put this in here, because one of the challenges with people that are organizations, at least post George Floyd, when everybody started getting like excited and really wanted to dig into this, they tapped the people on the shoulder, people of color, people who are gay, people with a disability. They tapped them on the shoulder to say, all right, you lead the DEI here. And I'm like, so I'm responsible for convincing everybody here why people like me should be seen and heard. Awkward, because I couldn't say no, but it's not my job to educate you. And so can you tell more about what you were thinking when you put this in here? Because this is a big one.
Yeah. So whenever we're having conversations about race, the obvious place to have them is with people of different backgrounds, or sexuality, nationality, anyone. Like you can't learn in a vacuum,
right?
And even just the act of asking can feel racist because you're identifying them by the observable trait.
Right.
And that's why in the workplace, like, having the gay person be in charge of the gay stuff and the black person be in charge of the DEI stuff is just, it's problematic, but you have to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And, there's a comment in the chat. Funny how liberals place so much emphasis on race and identity politics. Conservatives, including black conservatives, don't do this. Yet the conservatives are the ones who are often accused of being racist. How does that make sense? And I think that for me is the pepperoni pizza, is that if you're not asking any questions at all, you're not learning anything. But you have to be responsible for your own thoughts, and you have to be responsible for your own learning. And it's, I can't say, oh, Jina, she presents black, I can ask her these questions. It's not like that.
I can ask you black things.
Right. But we were able to bridge into that opportunity to have this engaging conversation. And so that's the part that's hard for a white woman, is how do you get your education? We all know that searching on the internet gets really problematic because every human being now has an opinion that they think is right and everyone else should listen to. And they're not all right.
Without listening to the other opinions, yes.
Right. And so all of that is just opinions in a vacuum. But it's not like you can go, if you have a black friend, going back to what we were talking about earlier, it's not like you can just like make it their job to help you understand.
Right. That being said, though, I think if you have a black friend, you can go to that friend and say, I'm struggling with X. Can you help me with that? And the friend can say, yeah, because, we're friends and I do want to help you with that if I can. But also, I'm not the representative of all black people. So I might not know the answer to that one either, actually. Let's look it up together, right? Or explore it together. but it's not on me to educate you, I think is the bottom line. First of all, I can't push it on you because nobody wants somebody up on a soapbox. So there's that side of it too. The one that you brought up, the question about identity politics and who does or doesn't do this. If we step aside from that, because some of that is making assumptions about each other just in the statement,
Yeah.
which I get. Like I totally get that. One of the things that came to mind for me there is that when you say some don't do this, I'll just take the labeling out. Some don't do this. I feel like when you say don't do it, it's because there's no articulation, there's no verbalization, there's no conversation. That's the equivalent of saying, I don't see color. Like we neutralize it. The problem with that is, but you do see color. The problem isn't that you see color. The problem isn't that we talk about race. The problem is that if you say you don't see color, you are undervaluing, devaluing, or dismissing the beautiful variety that comes with people with different hues of skin. And I want you to see mine. I want you to see me, all of me. And not talking about it sometimes can feel like you are ignoring the elephant in the room. So that's why all of this is so complicated, but it's important to be able to at least have these conversations, because when we can stumble around safely, maybe we can learn.
Like I think pineapple is a perfectly wonderful pizza topping, especially with pepperoni. But some people have never had pineapple pizza, and some people have a big problem with pineapple pizza. But if you don't ever try pineapple pizza, you can't give an opinion about pineapple pizza.
My son's girlfriend is vehemently opposed to pineapple on pizza, just for the record. And my son and I, pepperoni, pineapple, and onion, by the way. Beautiful pizza.
Oh, I'll try that.
Beautiful pizza. And just throwing that random thing, the other day he was putting bacon bits on like a vegetarian stew. So I'm vegetarian now, but I remember my pepperoni pizza. And he was putting bacon bits on a stew that I made. And I'm like, that's an odd one. He was like, yeah, bacon on anything. Fair. And I said, well, that'd be like putting bacon on pancakes. And then we were all like, well, hold on a second.
Oh, yeah.
That's actually kind of a good thing. So, well, listen, we're getting close to the end of time. Let's spend some time. I'd actually want to just take a moment and scroll through, because there's quite a bit that's come in. Some of this stuff is just.
Yeah. While you're skimming through, I want to actually go back to the thing about liberals versus conservatives and the conversation about race. And it's interesting that our politics is assumed to divide along those same lines. We've got woke culture, and like woke is an insult, but woke means you've woken up to an idea that the world is bigger than your opinion.
Right.
And that's why liberals are known for bringing up these questions about race, and not just ignoring it as something not important.
Yeah. And the term itself isn't necessarily the problem. And I think the challenge that we have is that a lot of the language that we're using has been weaponized.
Yeah.
And so that is the challenge, because it makes words unsafe to say. We can neutralize those words when we can have conversations. Just the idea that we're having a white woman use the phrase white woman when talking about race is taking back the power, neutralizing the phrase in a way that allows us to have conversation. All right, so somebody asked a question. Oh, go ahead.
One more thing, and one of the reasons why I was okay about calling this questions from a white woman is actually there's a song by Bo Burnham called "White Woman's Instagram." That is just it's a whole song with like all the tropes of the woman with her candles and in her cozy sweater and all of that, and it's hysterical. And that video made it okay for me to embrace the fact that I am a white woman and not be embarrassed by the fact that I'm a white woman, and acknowledge the fact that there is this underlying assumption of what that means. But the only way to be anything else is to talk about it.
Yeah. And so, I mean, you're calling it out, and this is true. The stereotypes about white women are there too. And so it can be difficult to overcome those stereotypes. This isn't just because you're Black that we have this, or just because we have a disability or something. That, you know, that otherness we were talking about at the beginning? Oh, we're good at labeling everybody. We do not discriminate. Everybody gets a label. And that's what we're trying to get away from. The one that I saw that I wanted to comment on, somebody asked, what about cultural communication styles, explicit, nonverbal communication, priorities, etc.? Cross-cultural communication, as we're starting to understand more and more, and here, I'm so happy to hear people talking about this, is a real thing, especially as you start to see diversity. People come from different ethnic traditions. Somebody that sounds like they speak English naturally and perfectly might actually have English as their second language. I live with a person like that. My husband has no detectable accent, but he did not learn to speak English until he was 13 or 14, and still finds some words that we say in English funny. We have to be thoughtful about jargons, lingo, euphemisms, sarcasm, because all of that can make all of this even more complicated, because I thought I was being funny with my little sarcastic joke and the other person took it literally. Not because of some difference, but because of a misunderstanding of the language itself. So it's just an important point. And thank you, Jeff, for bringing that up. Mm-hmm. So we have like 2 more minutes.
Okay.
Would you like to have the final word? Any thoughts that you have before I close us out?
Sure. One of the books that I've read that really makes a huge difference for me in framing my interpersonal relations and conversations like this, or just how I show up in the world, is The 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. And the first agreement is be impeccable with your word, which means use your word to bring out good in the world. Don't create negativity in the world. And it's also about what you do say and what you don't say, that sometimes omitting something is not being impeccable with your words. Sometimes there's things that should be said. The second one is don't make assumptions. And, you know, we have all kinds of cultural assumptions, and the hard part's identifying when you have an assumption that you need to move past. Mm-hmm. The third one is don't take things personally. That, you know, if somebody is making a joke, do they mean it really about you? Most people's stuff is about them. And if somebody triggers you, it's not you, it's whatever's going on for them. You just happen to be standing there. And so not taking things personally is one of the hardest things for human beings to do. Mm-hmm. And it's one of the ways to live powerfully is by just knowing other people's stuff is other people's stuff and my stuff is my stuff, and not collapsing the two. And the fourth one is always do your best. Your best is going to vary from day to day. Some days your best is going to be superhero quality, and some days your best is going to be getting out of bed to get lunch. And so your best is going to shift every day. But if you do the best that you can, you never have anything to apologize for. You just, you're giving it your all, and you are doing your best. So for me, those four tenets are what allow me to both live powerfully and achieve all the things that I'm doing and be a thought leader in the community, but then also open up the doors to conversations like this.
Yeah. Thank you for reminding us. Also reminding me, because that's a great book, and I've read it, and I'm going to have to go back to that and remind me of that. Well, thank you for joining me. Like I said, this is the wrap up of. I've been doing this one-on-one series now this is my 4th year, and it's been a run. And I've been lucky to have people like you join me to have these incredible conversations. I'll be doing a new series starting in 2025. So I don't know yet what that'll be. I have a name. I haven't given a name. So I want everybody to know that we have added in the attendance, in the handout, if you download it, some additional information here. I'm just clicking quickly through these slides. These are all there for you. Some additional thoughts to think about. This video at the very bottom is the YouTube link. So you're going to have to type it in. Oh, I should have been, wait, hold on. I'm going to copy it. And it's a bit last minute here, but I'm going to drop this into the chat. Oh, no, that's not it. Do not use that one. That is, I don't know why that That is not the one I wanted. Hold on. Let me come here and get it. That's hilarious. All right, I'm going to find it. In the meantime, okay, here it is. That one that I just dropped is my calendar link. Oops. So did you take that out, Gabe? Because if you did, thank you. And then let's see, what other slide is there? There's a couple more in here, but just I invite you to look at those. And so also our contact information is there. Alicia's information is there. If you're interested in learning more about her training, I would encourage you to reach out to her because she's incredible. And with that, Gabe, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And I look forward to seeing you in 2025.